This week's ode is to producers. Yay! I am biased because I am a producer, and I think that they are one of the unsung heroes of filmmaking. Um, and I didn't intend to be a producer. I had producing experience when I first got out of college and started working in the industry. I worked as an assistant to a producer, and so I kind of came at it from that angle. And I also worked in the development world where there are a lot of development execs, and they are producers on projects. And then when I went to USC for film school, and it has changed from what I've heard since I was there, but the production program didn't really have a producing track. They had producing teachers, and when you were producing thesis films, especially the department funded thesis films, you had to take a producing class. And so that was really where I got my kind of boot camp in producing, was when I was producing a documentary thesis film that was funded by the department. And I didn't initially want to be a producer, even though I had experience. I wanted to do something. I mean, I fell into the same boat where I wanted to do something more creative or more directly involved in the making of the film. And after going through that experience, even while I was trying to kind of crew up on one of these department funded thesis projects, everybody was like, "Oh, well, I already have a cinematographer, and I already have an editor, and I already have a sound person, but I don't have a producer, and I really need a producer." And nobody wanted to be a producer. And there's always a lot of question about what a producer actually is and what does a producer actually do, and nobody seems to really know what it is. So, and it's one of those things where, having gone through that experience and then produced this thesis film, and already having producing professional producing experience, and then going on to produce other people's projects and then my own projects, I realized producing is one of the only ways to get your project off the ground. You if you know how to produce, you don't really have to wait for anyone. You're not waiting. I mean, there are things that you're obviously waiting on. You need to find money, you need to find locations. There are a lot of things that you have to, but you are the one actively going out and getting them. You're not just waiting for this magical green light, or if you were a cinematographer, you're not waiting for a project to come work with you, or an editor, things like that. And so obviously producing is not for everyone, and it does certainly take certain skills and personality, but it, to me it was a game changer, kind of inadvertently being forced to do something that I was actually good at and did enjoy. And that's part of the reason why I fell into that work in the first place. It just, you know um so what is a producer? There are a lot of different producing roles. And so the producer at large is seeing the project from the beginning all the way to the final distribution, press, junket, release of the film. And they're kind of overseeing that. Oftentimes, they're the one that owns the rights to it, or at least is responsible for all the legal paperwork and everything to make sure that the project is viable for the market. And they're essentially a project manager and responsible for all of that. So they're the ones that get the Oscar statue for Best Picture at the end of the night. An executive producer is somebody with the money or with the story or with the book that you're adapting or with, something that is crucial to making this film happen. They could even be one of the leads. If you've got a star actor who's doing it for a very low rate, they might be an executive producer. But an executive producer doesn't necessarily have much say in the day-to-day production. And they're not really hands-on in that sense. Now, a producer might not be as hands-on either, because they might be producing other projects. They might have multiple projects in production at a time, and so they'll kind of check in with each production. But again, they are responsible for it, and they usually go to set for at least a portion of the time. Your on-set producer is your UPM, your unit production manager, your production manager if you only have one unit of production. And they're the ones that deal with payroll and making sure everything is where it needs to be and getting stuff ready for the next day or checking in for next week, consolidating production reports, and handling petty cash and runs, and sending things up for budget checks, all of that stuff. But they're not necessarily on set. They're like in an office near set so that if anything happens, they're there. And then there are other kind of sub production coordinator positions and things like that. And then the person that's kind of running the set is the assistant director, or AD, which really is a producing type of position, even though it falls under the directing category in the Directors Guild. But because it's very managerial, you're managing all the people on set, managing production, it very much falls in line with a producing kind of mindset. But one of the things that I think is really important, especially when you're just starting out, is that nobody really knows what a producer is. And when you set out to go make a film, you're like, well, I need a camera and I need a sound person. You think about all the things that you need to make the film. And nobody thinks about adding on a producer in any capacity. And when you are making independent films, you're often wearing multiple hats. So I'm a producer, writer, director. Or you might have a producer who's also the UPM, and all that. But when I'm working on a project, I might be producer, writer, director, but once I come on set, I'm like just the director, right? And so I need other producers to help facilitate production. So what are things that producers do? Obviously, they go and find the money. So whatever fundraising, they're part of that. Producers that don't fundraise are more like physical production producers. They're still producers. They're still making the project happen. But there are a lot of producers whose focus is really just on physical production. And once you wrap production, they're not as involved in post-production. They might not be as involved in distribution because their specialty is physical production. But there are many producers, and nowadays people talk about like being a creative producer, where you're really there for the whole life cycle of the project. So finding money, and then really being a producer is about figuring out the logistics of the production and the whole project at large, and how to get it done on budget and on schedule. Who are the people that you need to make that happen? What are the elements that you need for all of that to happen? And so a lot of times the people that I see that are good at producing really like logic puzzles, like Sudoku, crossword puzzles, Wordle, like those kinds of things, where you like putting puzzles together and you like figuring things out and moving things around until it makes the most sense logically for an efficient production, both in time, resources, and money. And there are so many different ways to kind of approach it from that. And you kind of have to enjoy it. It's tedious work, but for those of us who do it, we actually like it. It's interesting. And even though it's tedious, it is also very satisfying. So there are the logistics, and then there are the people skills. And the people skills certainly come into play when looking for money, because you need to charm people and get people to part with their money. It also comes into play in gathering the team. You're the one hiring people, obviously working with the director and, all of those things. But you're the one that's handing out the contracts and negotiating and all of that. So people skills are really important. And that is true on set as well. And this, becomes more of the on-set producer role. So if it's an indie and you're the producer and you're also the on-set producer, aka the production manager, then you would you would be doing both of these things. But you really are the diplomat in the production team. You can't take sides. You have to be the mediator, you have to be the mom, you have to go around and make sure everybody's okay and happy and comfortable, and uh, making sure that they're eating on time, making sure that they, are getting enough water, uh, that they're taking breaks. You just have to kind of take care of your crew. And you can delegate this to like a key PA or a PA or something. But that is, again, kind of a producer's mentality where your job is to take care of your crew so that they do good work. And that is not something that an AD should do, because the AD is checking in with everybody, yes, but to make sure that things are running on time and that you are getting the footage that the director wants and that you all need for the film to be made. The AD can't also be making sure that people have gotten a snack at Crafty, or, when was the last time they had some water, or, I don't know, that kind of stuff. You need somebody else to do that, and that is, again, producers can be busy checking in with what's going on in the longer term part of the production, like the location for the next day, or equipment, or meals coming in, or things like that. But if it's part of the mentality to assign somebody that role. And this came up recently because I was like at an event where with a friend of mine who's worked with me, and as a director, I end up creating friendships with people who will like feed me, which sounds ridiculous, but it's like, when you're a director and in this industry, it's very easy to get kind of like blinders where you'll just like work, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, 8 hours passed and I haven't gotten up from this chair. I've just been editing the entire time. Or, you're working on set and you're just paying attention to what you're doing, and you have no sense of time or anything, and you forget to eat, you forget to drink water, you forget to take breaks, you forget to sit down, you just like, because you're so focused. And so this happened at an event recently where like they opened up this buffet of food, and my friend who worked with me was like, hey, do you want something to eat? And I was like, yeah, I'll go do that in a second. And she just like made me a plate and brought it to me. And then when I was like looking for a napkin, she like whipped one out of her back pocket and was like, here you go. And somebody who was watching it was like, oh my god, you're right. Like, and that is a producer mentality. are taking care of the people that are doing the work. And it's so important, and especially when you're just starting out, like if you're shooting outside, like you need to make sure that people have sunscreen, shade, bug spray, liquid IV, a lot of water, some kind of electrolyte so that they don't just hydrate without electrolytes. And you need to make sure that somebody is paying attention to those kinds of logistics and taking care of their crew and not worrying about the shot or the sound or the lighting or the performance or anything like that. Like they are just focused on the people, right? And so make sure that you have a good producing element to your project.